So first question is kind of interesting. It was a non-COVID question, which is kind of like a nice departure, and I'll be excited to answer it, but also maybe it'll be fun to listen to something kind of new. This question was about bone health, and the person asked me, can you talk to me about how vitamin D, vitamin K2, and magnesium impact calcium, and how therefore those things impact your bone health? Okay. So just as quick reminders as far as classification goes, vitamin D and vitamin K2 are both fat-soluble vitamins, so they do not dissolve in water, okay? Whereas magnesium is an element that dissolves very easily in water. Vitamin D is primarily found, if we think about food, from fish, from eggs, and from dairy. Okay, but really our main source happens secondary to that conversion that happens as sun hits our body, and internally we make vitamin D. And we now know that people have differing levels of ability to make vitamin D. There's something called the VDR receptor that can be subject to small little genetic changes that may make you more or less able to utilize and keep sufficient levels of vitamin D in your body. Okay, but vitamin D is really essential to calcium and therefore bone health, because it's somewhat simplified, but it helps calcium move properly in the body, and it enhances the absorption of calcium from the intestines, okay, to help move them to bones. Vitamin K2, right, another fat-soluble vitamin, exists in two forms. It exists as K1, which is primarily involved in the clotting cascade. So there we think about it more with respect to cardiovascular health. And you'll find K1 in all of your leafy greens, okay? Whereas K2 is more involved in bone health. And this is something that is made secondary to lactic acid fermentation in the gut by certain special bacteria. And it's also found in some fermented foods. Natto, N-A-T-T-O, is one of them. Probably none of us have eaten it. I have, but I don't know that I like it. But just as an FYI, that's a food that has a lot of vitamin K2 in it. Now, K2 is really important because it increases cells called osteoblasts. So B for boy, B for blast. I remember in medical school, the way I remember that is B for bone building. So it's the cell that increases bone, right? It makes bones for you. And K2 does that. And truthfully, when I recommend vitamin D to people, I typically recommend it with K2 because it's been shown to improve the ability of vitamin D to stay sufficient if you add that K2 with it, okay? Lastly, our magnesium guy. Magnesium has kind of multiple effects, and truthfully, as a general reminder, magnesium plays a role in so many parts of the body, right? I always joke that if I was stranded on a desert island, I would take magnesium with me because it's really important. And when we talk about bone health, it has some direct effects by altering the bone making to breaking ratio. So that making to breaking ratio is kind of always moving and always dynamic, and it helps the making part of that ratio. And it also has some indirect effects, because if you're insufficient, meaning too low in magnesium, that can cause things like subtle levels of inflammation and oxidative stress, which have negative impacts on your bone health, okay? So I do think all three of those are really important to answer the discrete question that was thrown at me. But I will also say that if you are struggling with osteopenia or osteoporosis, it is a much more multifactorial issue than just those three elements, right? Especially in women, we're thinking about the role of hormones, the role of exercise, genetics. There are many variables, including many other nutrients for that matter, that play a role in your bone health. So if this is relevant to you, that you should talk to your doctor or me about creating both a comprehensive, but also a really individualized plan about what are your variables that are affecting your bone health, okay? So hopefully that's helpful.